delighted to join you this evening and thank you for the opportunity to share some information about a very special vehicle in our collection at the National Motor Museum, the 1908 Talbot, known as the Overlander. I want to tell you a bit about the car and the travelling exhibition that we undertook between the 30th of June and the 21st of August last year. Last year was the centenary of a very special event, the first time that the Australian continent was crossed by a motor vehicle. This exhibition was designed to celebrate that fact and to encourage people to explore the lasting legacy of the journey. In 1908, when South Australians Harry Dutton and Murray Ornger drove their 25 horsepower Talbot into Darwin, they'd made history as the first people to cross the Australian continent by motor car. This was a time when the outback was still essentially a frontier. Although Dutton and Ornger travelled through known territory, following the railway line and the telegraph line, long-distance travel was not common in Australia and visitors to the outback were rare. Their 51-day journey, which included 42 days of driving, was undertaken long before there were roads, bridges, service stations or road maps. Leaving Adelaide on the 30th of June 1908, they conquered sandhills and rocky creek beds, dense tropical undergrowth and rivers. They even ran the gauntlet of bushfire in their car. The logistics were similarly impressive. Fuel and supplies had to be sent ahead by train and then with cameleers from Adelaide, and with a steamship to Darwin and then sent south. Murray Ornger's diary records his packing list. It includes fan belts, rubber pipe for a siphon, chains for wheels, coconut matting, pick, spark plugs, shovel, goggles, petrol funnel, soldering iron, hacksaw, grease, nuts and bolts, Stepney wheels and jacks, amongst a long list of items, which I'm sure you people take on all of your wellness, don't you? All of which had to be packed in and on the vehicle. This was not their first attempt at the transcontinental crossing. The previous year they'd set out in another Talbot, known affectionately and for reasons I can't explain to you, as Angelina. At the time, cars were built tough. They had to be. Because even in cities, roads were not smooth, easy driving like they are today. And once you got a car beyond the city, all roads were hard going. But the British-made Talbot had already proven its ability to handle Australian driving conditions. On their first attempt, Dutton and Ornger left Adelaide in November. They drove through the dry centre of the continent at its hottest, and indeed that summer had record high temperatures, only to become bogged outside Tennant Creek as they headed towards the tropics in the wet season. The vehicle was secured as best they could, and the travellers abandoned it and made their way south again on horseback as far as Oodnadatta, and then they took the train home again to begin preparations for their second attempt. Their second attempt was successful. They had learned a great deal on their first trip, and their second trip was much better prepared. For example, on their first trip, at one stop their fuel cans had been left in the sun and they exploded, meaning that they didn't have enough fuel to get to their next fuel stop. They loaded the car onto the train to get to their next stop in Oodnadatta, which was in fact the terminus of the railway, so they were lucky that it was that fuel stop that they missed. They were also ready to tackle the Dapper sandhills south of Alice Springs, although nothing could prepare them for terrain so utterly unsympathetic to the motor car. You can see they had a second set of wheels on the car, called Stepney wheels. These provided added traction and helped stop the car sinking so quickly in the soft ground. This photo shows a team of donkeys that they found nearby to help pull Angelina through some of the difficult terrain. They also used coconut matting to create a roadway of sorts. This had to be carried on top of the vehicle, and Harry Dutton notes in a letter to his wife sent from Oodnadatta on their first trip that one of the rolls had come loose and fallen off, which he notes was a rather serious matter. And when you look at the terrain, you think that a rather serious matter is perhaps understating it. On their second journey, they recovered Angelina, and with only some minor mechanical work, she was back on the road, well, the road so to speak, and the party continued on. If sandhills weren't enough of a problem, termite mounds were another challenge. The big ones weren't so bad, they could easily be seen, but the smaller ones hidden in the grass could damage the underside of the car if they weren't spotted. And sometimes the grass was indeed quite long. And if the deserts weren't enough of a challenge, there were always the wetter country up north to deal with. Creek crossings without a bridge were not easy. Newspapers of the day explain how the creeks were crossed. Approaching Pine Creek, the motorists encountered a bad crossing at the Edith, in which there were 4 foot of strongly running water. A tarpaulin was secured over the front of the car, which was driven full speed through the stream, carrying by its impetus a sheet of water some 20 to 30 feet up the opposite bank. And still from the newspaper, the worst crossing was Bridge Creek, so named because of a railway bridge, not a road bridge, where there was a sheer drop of 30 foot on the south bank, while the bed of the creek was a mass of boulders, with the opposite bank covered with thick scrub and creeping vines. A rough cutting was made on the south bank, and once in the bed of the creek, the car was sent full speed across the boulder-strewn bed of the creek in a shower of sparks from the steel-studded tyres and forced up the steep bank on the opposite side. But you people would know all about that from your roads. Progress was very slow along some sections. In their 42 days of driving, they averaged only about 80 kilometres per day, often considerably less. Their fastest progress was as they approached Daly Waters, and they discovered that they were surrounded by a bushfire. Murray Ornger noted somewhat wryly that this was their fastest 10 miles of the whole journey. It was also during this run that they sustained their only punctures. Indeed, at the conclusion of their journey, Michelin proudly ran ads boasting that the continent had been crossed on only one set of Michelin tyres. Getting through the jungle outside Darwin was a bit of a nightmare too. The travellers mentioned the showers of green ants and other insects dislodged from their nests overhead. So how did they get home? They proved that the Outback was no match for the mighty motor car, so they turned around and drove home. Not likely. They actually loaded both cars on a steamer, which came back via Brisbane to Adelaide, and they elected that mode of transport as well. Chickens, I reckon. One question we were asked a lot while we were travelling with this exhibition from Adelaide to Darwin was, well, why did they do it? And we can't answer that question with certainty because nowhere is it recorded why they took it in their heads to undertake such a difficult and treacherous journey. But we can make a guess.